Now on to Iran, a country that is once again in the spotlight and dominating discussion both for national and international leaders, and for much of the U.S. mainstream media as well. Now, this is in part due to an article published over the weekend in the New York Times, which sparked major discussion about the U.S. role in dealing with Iran ahead of tonight's presidential debate on foreign policy. The article outlines somewhat vaguely how both the U.S. and Iran have agreed, in principle, to talks after the November 6th election. The talks would be aimed at Tehran curbing its nuclear ambitions, though some have called it an attempt by Iran to use the prospect of direct diplomatic talks to buy time. Following the publication of the article, both the White House and Iranian officials publicly denied it. National Security Council spokesman Tommy Vietor says it's not true that the United States and Iran have agreed to one-on-one talks or any meeting after the American elections. We continue to work with the P5+1 on a diplomatic solution and have said from the outset that we would be prepared to meet bilaterally. The president has made clear that he'll prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon and that we will do what we must to achieve that. We want to dissect this and also to look at it in a few different ways. I've got Adam Paramity, a producer for HuffPost Live, to help me do that. Adam, I know you've covered this from a few different angles. Let's put politics aside for just a second here and talk about the foreign policy aspect of this. If this New York Times article is true, or even parts of it are true, what are the implications here?
Sure. Well, the implication is that the United States has publicly vilified Iran, and now they're going largely behind the U.S. public's back and is reaching out to them to, for whatever reason or for whatever way, create a political resolution to the nuclear file, to the nuclear program. That has many people in Washington worried. You know, there's been this sort of, for the last 30 years or so, Iranophobia in the American political culture. And so any attempt by, the Obama administration to reach out to Iran can really be used by their political opponents, their domestic political opponents, to create fodder for the campaign, for the debate tonight. On the foreign policy realm, I argue that it's largely good for Obama to do this. I think this issue with Iran-U.S. relations is really reaching a crucial point where the Iranian public is buckling under these most profound sanctions, and the U.S. position of power in the region is really precariously, delicately in the balance.
What do you think, Adam, it says, though, about the state of foreign policy that both parties, both the administration and Iran, seem to be denying in engaging in such a popular course of action?
Well, it's possible that the New York Times report wasn't entirely accurate in how they portrayed this agreement. I mean, we don't really know if a date has been set, if the endpoints have been agreed to. What we do know is that both sides are open to some sort of direct bilateral negotiation, and that's really significant because what both publics have been, or what both governments have been telling their people, is that it's almost impossible to come to the negotiating table. And so that's sort of the real impetus for putting down these reports and denying it.
So, okay, we will bring politics into this. Some calling this, a quote-unquote October surprise, saying it could give the president, like you said, it could be a popular thing, give the president a boost. But I'm wondering, is there any indication that Mitt Romney would refuse talks or would even do things differently if he's elected?
Well, it's a good question, because I think Iranian leaders in their public statements have even said that they don't really see much of a difference between Obama and Romney. I mean, we see in the last 4 years, the Obama administration has largely continued or expanded Bush's covert policies against the Islamic Republic of Iran. So there isn't really, an idea of what a Romney presidency would do in negotiations. I think it would be a bad idea for Romney to pull out of talks if they were agreed upon, because it would make it seem like Romney really isn't interested in talks, and it would put the onus on the United States to kind of come to the table. And that's not a position that the U.S. wants to be in. Instead, I think Iran looks at the United States as a system, as a continuous system, and one that has really, kept a same policy of pressure and more pressure on Iran for the last 30 years or so.
It's been so interesting watching, the media reaction to this. It used to be that a big story would be saved, for the front cover of the Sunday New York Times, and I think eventually that's where it was printed. But this came out on Saturday, so that it gave the producers of those Sunday shows enough of a chance to change the topics and to book guests. A major mainstream media blitz when it came to interpreting the meaning of this report. Let me just play, Adam, a small bit of what you may have seen or heard this weekend.
Days before the big debate on foreign policy, the Obama fan club newsletter, i.e. the New York Times, drops a bombshell, claiming the U.S. and Iran have agreed to negotiate on nukes.
Let me ask you about something that's developing this morning. In the New York Times, exclusive reporting about Iran.
Yesterday, there were reports that the administration is considering or moving toward direct negotiations with Iran over its pursuit of nuclear weapons.
The timing of this is so curious. The weekend before this final presidential debate.
Hours really before, and I think that's why the White House was so quick in its denial last night.
So the timing, the curious nature of this, what about the fact that most Americans, at least according to polls, would prefer diplomatic talks to the alternative, no talks at all, or military force?
Sure, and that was one of Obama's original 2008 campaign promises. He wanted to bring Iran to the table and come to the table for talks. I don't think he entered the White House really knowing what that would entail. When he made his proposals, some would say that they were half-hearted, that they didn't really address key Iranian concerns over the U.S.'s presence in the region, and some would say that Iran just wanted to buy time. I think that these current round of sanctions kind of play into that because it gives the Obama administration a chance to say, look, we can save face now. We've implemented the most harsh sanctions regime in the history of U.S.-Iran relations, and now the Iranians are really starting to feel it and are starting to capitulate under U.S. pressure. So if that's the argument that the U.S. wants to make, then it makes sense that they would want to say, give these signs or these leaks that they're ready to talk and that Iran is ready to talk. Conversely, Iran can also say, look, due to the Arab Spring, due to the U.S. losing allies in the region, the U.S. is now ready to talk, and the U.S. wants to have some sort of diplomatic agreement with Iran so that we can put these hostilities behind us. Because really, at the end of the day, it's the American people, it's the Iranian people that are losing out over these continued hostilities between the two governments, and those arguments really give the two sides a way to pull back from the brink and to come away from the edge that they've put themselves towards.
Yeah, certainly, you're right. I mean, sometimes winning the messaging war is more important than what actually happens. You were talking just a second ago about the sanctions. I know an official with the Obama administration said today that while diplomacy could be a part of the puzzle, sanctions have been essential to the U.S. plan designed to pressure Iran to come back to the table. I mean, is this a desperate measure by Iran because of these crippling sanctions, or do you think there's a whole lot more to the puzzle here?
I think at the end of the day, these nuclear negotiations are really more geopolitical in nature. The sanctions have had definitely a horrible toll on the population. My own family included is feeling these sanctions. I think that it can be used as a way, again, to bring both sides to the table. But what's interesting is that, Congress is the one that has enacted these sanctions, and so it would take legislation to repeal them. Additionally, they've implemented these sanctions for a whole variety of reasons, not just the nuclear program. Ostensibly, the human rights violations that Iran has committed, or its, quote-unquote, global support for terrorism. And so it's hard to see how, the U.S. administration, Obama's administration, would repeal these sanctions piecemeal if Iran had some sort of agreement for its nuclear program.
Adam, I just heard you say that even your family has been impacted by the sanctions. I mean, what have you heard? What do you think is the story not being told in the U.S. that you would like to get across here? Well,
I think what's most interesting is that the U.S. administration has said that we're going to let humanitarian and medical aid go through, and that's true. They're not preventing that, but what they are doing is cutting off effectively Iran's central bank and also how it pays on the international market for financial transactions. And that has effectively created an economic humanitarian blockade because, quite frankly, Iranian hospitals can't pay pharmaceutical companies for the medications they need. And so people, Iranian Americans are resorted to bringing medication with them, mass amounts of Tylenol, special cancer-related treatments or medications to Iran physically because, quite frankly, the hospitals there can't buy it themselves due to the financial sanctions.
Certainly some basic things a whole lot of people in this country probably take for granted, and just so much going on there that we really aren't so aware of. Adam Paramity, a producer with HuffPost Live, thanks so much.
Thank you.